Welcome to the Project 180 podcast. My name is Kevin McGowan. On today's episode, I'm speaking with a friend of mine, Amy Eyman-Leblanc. She is based in Ottawa, as am I, and she is a longtime professional change management consultant. We actually worked together in the learning group at Kinaxis for a while. She's got a big focus on learning development as well. What we're going to talk about today is the intersection between change management and project management. So I hope you enjoy this one. Here is my chat with Amy.
Hey Amy, how you doing?
I'm great, Kevin. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Nice to see you again, even though it's on a very small screen.
Yeah.
Today I can see on a very small screen.
Sorry. Good things come in small packages, Kevin. Good things.
So today we're going to talk about change management and its relationship to project management. I was wondering first, though, if you could kind of just give me a bit of an intro on who you are for our massive viewing audience and let them know your background a little bit.
Okay. So my name is Amy, and I've been in the change, training, and ERP IT space for a number of years, certainly over 25.
Okay.
I've learned a lot and I've seen a lot as how ERPs and ITs have changed. I think anyone who's been in the game for a while has. And I certainly have seen the rise as well of the importance and positioning of change management within projects, both large scale and small scale as well. So that's me, and that's why I'm into change management, as they say.
Can you just define ERP?
Enterprise resource planning. So big software systems like SAP, for example, would be a classic ERP.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much. So can you explain a little about, I mean, it maybe sounds obvious unless you've been working in it for a while, but like, what is change management at that high level, and why does an organization, large or small, why is that an important thing to consider?
Yeah, so when you look at the typical project, you have your project manager, your project team, and they're really focused on the success of moving that project forward and getting it out to the stakeholders and the end user. The change manager is really focused on helping those same individuals, the stakeholders, the end users. They have a variety of names. We'll call them stakeholders throughout this conversation. Understand the whys. They understand why it's important to them, why it's important to the organization. But the change management really looks at it from a much broader perspective than just preparing the stakeholders. They're looking at preparing and engaging the sponsors. They're helping to define the vision for success. So what does success look like? And sometimes that's done on a project side, but typically, again, on the project, they're looking at the say in IT, they're looking at the tactical results. Change is looking at the people results. So if you look at the typical vision for success for a project, it's really looking at, let's say it's a new time entry system for people. It's really looking at, we'll be able to, do a flow of the time entry from when a person enters it to the approval, putting it straight through to the payroll department to make sure that, say hourly employees are, their calculated hours are done. So they're really looking at it from the technical component. Change is looking at saying, okay, so that vision of success is to meet those objectives. We're going to look at it from an employee now can enter their time seamlessly from wherever they happen to be. So if they're an hourly employee, can they do it from the field if they work outside of a typical office environment? How easy is it for them to enter, say, hey, I'm taking vacation, or I'm entering overtime, or I was sick leave, on sick leave or something like that. And so that's really where the two of change management and project management work together, but the end goals are different. I'll say the focus is different, not the end goals are different. The focus of it is very different.
So is the change management side of it is more, I guess, human focused?
Yeah,
ultimately?
Absolutely.
And behavioral focused?
It could be, yes. A lot of times in change, we do encounter preparing people to think about doing things, think about doing their normal jobs and their normal routines in a different way. And that can be a very big challenge, because when we're in an office environment, we're used to doing things in a certain way, and now change comes about, and now I have to do it a different way. So one of the challenges, I would say, of change management is helping people feel good and confident and competent that they can do these things in a different way. So it's no longer just the new way of working, it is the way we work. So it's that transition from new to this is it, this is standard for us today.
Right.
And that can be a bit of a challenge. But that's where the excitement comes in, because every project is different and you have to think about things in a different way.
Well, I knew change management was going to be exciting. So
Yeah.
that's cool.
I wouldn't do it if it wasn't exciting. Yeah.
But it's an interesting perspective. I mean, as a project manager, one of the things I've always tried to focus on, obviously, is what the like you were saying earlier, the stakeholders, whoever they may be, are going to get what they need out of it. But I think in terms of the change aspect, a big part of it is also making sure that stakeholders' needs are heard before the planning really starts, right?
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who are not just going to be pushed into a change situation. Oh, you've got a new tool to use.
Yeah.
Here's the new screwdriver. Here's a new software system. Here's a new process. They actually need to be actively involved in that to make the whole
Yes.
process a lot easier.
Yes. And in great projects, and I say great, no project starts off wanting to be bad, of course. Just as no employee wants to come to work and do a bad job. It's a major part of our lives. But I would say that in the early days of systems implementations, there wasn't as much of a focus on change management. It was kind of thought that the project team and the business analyst or the functional analyst would take that role on. And so a lot of that focus on that assessment of here's what you do today, here's what it's going to look like tomorrow, what are your needs, what are your gaps, how can we bridge those, was and still is primarily done by the business analysts. Or functional consultants, or whatever they may be called on the project. And there's a very good reason for that. Of course, they're looking at it to make sure that they can make the new system work, that they can close the gaps, etc. Great projects include a change management focus during that process, because exactly as you said, technically, there may not be much of a change, but from a human focus, there may be gaps that they're saying, hey, right now I've got to contact someone in this department, but our system doesn't do that connection. So I have to send an email and then follow up with a phone call and then follow up with another phone call. And then, do you know what I mean? And so if there could be some sort of workflow built into this system to help ease that, it would be great. Those are the sorts of things that you may not necessarily learn about unless you're specifically asking those questions and saying, how does information get to the next group, the next team to process. And so, ideally, in my mind, you would always have a change manager brought on early who could be participating in some of those workshops and asking those questions, or at the very least, looking at the results of the gap analysis and saying, okay, what about now? What about now? Well, what about here? How does it flow? So it really becomes a little bit of mapping the processes, the business mapping in a way, but looking at it from a change perspective and a human focus.
So, and I can see this fairly easily in a large infrastructure type project, process type project, like you're saying, you got our process is kind of broken. I have to email, I have to make phone calls, I have to do all this kind of stuff, and it's not working. But what about, a smaller project, new version of software, or something like that that's maybe not quite on the same scale? How does change management work into maybe a smaller, not massive organizational project, but something a little more micro?
I think it does. It does still have its place, because again, if we look at the role of project management, it's really about implementing the changes to the business, and maybe not IT, maybe it's more of an organizational change. And change is still looking at the human focus. Now, on very small projects, if you have a project manager who is also well-versed in change management, that could be the same group or the same person or the same small team. But I would say that if you are making changes to your business that will impact your employees and impact your clients or your customers, you need change management. You need to be looking at how do we structure our communications? How do we structure and engage our stakeholders? What is our vision for success? Because there's a reason that you're doing this change, and the vision isn't just to increase your return on investment or increase speed to your consumer. It's impacting employees as well, and they need to know how they play a part in that overall success. So large or small, I think there is a place for it. Does it necessarily have the same scope as a huge project? Of course not, but the project itself probably doesn't have the same scope. And so the good thing about so many different change management methodologies and approaches is they are scalable, just as they are in project management methodologies as well, right? So a good one is scalable, and you can focus on that.
That's really helpful. It helps me kind of understand where it fits in. I'm wondering. I don't want you to name names,
No,
obviously,
obviously.
but an example of something you've worked on or even heard about that was like a really like kick butt. This one went so well in terms of change, and maybe compare it with something that didn't quite go so well. Like what influenced each. Obviously, you're going to say the change manager was the best part.
Not always.
But like in terms of process, like what's an example of something that went really well and maybe one that didn't go so well?
Okay. So I worked on a project that was sort of IT, and here's what went really well with it. Number one, there was a team of change, I'll say specialists or change agents. Some were internal to the company and some were consultants like myself. First of all, we all worked very collaboratively with the project team, and there were a number of little things going in, but they all needed to combine to a whole. This was for a wealth management firm. And so basically they offered financial services to clients within a particular sector. So what went well is the sponsors were super engaged, like very visible, very active. They were well prepared. They were interested in what was happening on the various projects. They wanted to know how not only the project, but the people side of things, the change was progressing. If you ask them to say, hey, we have this crazy idea to do a little bit of a video that can go across the country. We'd like you to talk about X, Y, and Z. Are you willing to do that? They were like, yes, tell us when and where. We want to be involved.
Fantastic.
And that's crucial, because if you have employees who see this just happening from the top and, but hey, nobody can be bothered to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, whether you're conscious of it or not, you kind of start to wonder about the real importance of it. Do you know what I mean? And so this sponsorship engagement was crucial, I think, to the success of it. Number two, we had great communication. So this was impacting a bunch of financial advisors. The financial advisors, they had lots of questions because, of course, this is changing how they engage with their clients. And a lot of them were super engaged with their clients. They had been working with these clients for years and years to help them grow their portfolios, and they wanted to make sure that they could still have that, what we call a high touch with those clients. And so there were, they were implementing different levels of investing and wealth management into the company. And so there was a great opportunity to really work with the financial advisors and say, this is how you can maintain that high touch for those clients who want it, because none of this was imposed. If a client still wanted to be high touch, they were high touch. If they were saying, heck no, I can do this on my own, then they did it on their own. And they were supported along the way. So there were, when we went out with the sponsors, there was a lot of discussion about that, saying, no, we're not telling you that you don't talk with or engage with your clients in the same way. There will be different levels, and you can work with them and help them understand. And hey, this is how it will look. So the readiness, I would say, and the communication with the financial advisors was top notch. And then finally, of
Amazing.
course, we had to do the communication and readiness for the clients themselves. So what's changing? Why is it changing? How is it changing? Some of the questions that we anticipated would come were the same as they were coming from the advisors themselves, but we addressed them slightly in a slightly different way. And so I would say that that was a very successful project in the end, just from a change perspective itself, and from a project's perspective, it went very well as well. So yeah.
Well, I mean, like the checklist is pretty clear. Like you had the sponsors engaged and heavily engaged. They weren't just like, yeah, go do this. You know, this shall happen. Go. You know, like they actually were involved, and I like your example of filming, you know, the videos and being involved in those communications, because that showed people.
Yes.
It's one thing to say you're involved. It's one thing to be involved. It's another to appear as if you're involved. So you have to have all of that together, right? So, and then if all that communication and all that engagement is there, it makes everything so much easier, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, and I mean, we've all seen projects go wrong.
Yeah.
Well, not me. You know, I'm just kidding. We've all seen projects go wrong. But in terms of the change element, like what's not maybe the disaster scenario, but what's something that hasn't gone right, and why? Like what was the reason maybe it didn't quite go the way it should have?
There are a couple of examples that I can see. One, I was a part of a small change team. Again, it was a project that had I'll say sub-projects underneath it, or sub-work streams. And I think the biggest challenge for that one is there wasn't visible sponsorship. There wasn't that active communication, but more importantly, each work stream was impacting the same set of employees, but they were all handled as slightly separate. And so when I came in, and I came in a bit late, I really tried hard to say, how are we going to connect the dots for these employees? Because they're being impacted by pretty much all of these work streams. How can we pull it together for them so that they don't have to connect the dots at separate times, that they have some clarity on, okay, this part of my process is changing. Here's what I need to do now. And it was not an IT implementation, so it was a little more challenging to do that. It was different parts of a very complex process to begin with. And so that, I think that we collectively could have done a much better job on. I kept banging the gong for that, but you know, when you don't have active sponsorship and everyone has different timelines and different objectives, that can be hard to pull together. But at least there was an awareness that we're leaving the employee to connect the dots here, and that perhaps is not optimal, and very confusing. I think the second one is where it was an IT implementation, and there was zero collaboration between the project team and the change and training team. So you literally had these separate streams acting as, here's the project, here's change. I mean, to the point where the change and training team were not allowed to talk to the project team members who were implementing the change. So
that sounds like that's a disaster. If you can't even, especially if you're instructed, that just speaks to leadership, right? Like that's a serious flaw.
Yeah, for sure. So that to me was not a good way to do it, obviously. And I would say that's probably the worst case example of anything I've been on. I think, you know, more likely what happens, and it's not good or bad, I think it's a learning and understanding of the importance of change, regardless of the size, is, you know, especially in Ottawa, there's still a lot of projects where they don't necessarily understand or value change management and what it can bring to the table and the importance of it. I think within Ottawa and the federal government, there's a very big project, it shall remain nameless, that did not go well for a variety of reasons, not only because of change, and the repercussions of that are still being felt by the federal public service today. And so it is a testament to the importance of making sure that change is properly positioned with the project. We are not separate. We are not a separate entity from the project. And I find it interesting that if you go to any project manager and say, what's the importance of training? They all get it. They all get that training is important. The training is a component of change. And yes, perhaps from a change and project perspective, you're dealing with similar entities, or similar processes. You're talking about the vision for success. You're actively engaging, hopefully. You're engaging with your sponsors, right? Or you want them to be actively engaged. But it's actively engaged is a two-way street. It's not just reporting to the sponsors that we've successfully completed this milestone. It is, we've successfully completed this milestone from the project, and here's the impact it has had on the people. So it's a two-way street, right? And I would say that that's the key integration and importance between project management and change management. They both have their place, and they both contribute to the success, the true success of the project. I think a lot of project managers know that if you were to ask them, how do you know if your project is successful? Well, it's not just because you got to the end and you did everything you needed to do. It's because your people know how to use this thing that you've implemented, whether it be a system or new processes or a reorganization. And so that is the realm of change management and the focus of change management.
Well, that's I mean, super helpful. I think what's interesting for me there is like when you're wrapping up there talking about how do you determine if it's successful. Ideally, you've determined those success metrics at the beginning. It's like, X people are going to be able to improve their performance and by 50% or whatever. But also there's an element there of their satisfaction or their feelings of success that measure into it as well. And also in terms of, the communication, the relationships. One last question, or related to all this in terms of like the post-mortem after a project, right? Because that's like super critical for any project. And like, whether if you're an agile place and you're doing like, retrospectives every couple of weeks, every sprint or whatever it is you're doing, you're always having that conversation. But after the whole schmozzle is done, you go back and you're reviewing, okay, what went well, what went not so well. How have you seen maybe the bad stuff turn into a good news story, right? Okay, we didn't really handle this stuff so well. Next time we'll do it better. Like, is that part of the conversation generally?
It should be part of the conversation. The reality is that because change management is usually brought on as part of a project, we're gone when the project ends. And the reality is that change from a people perspective, and I think organizations need to understand this, it's a bit of the long game. Everybody's going to adapt at different levels. And not everybody's going to be able to get it from day one, nor should they. If you're talking about processes that, say you're in manufacturing, they take, from the sales to the goods being delivered, for example, that's a bit of a long game. You're not going to see all of that success on day one. It's going to take a bit of time, right, to follow that through the chain, the process chain. And so, yes, I think that what is important is, have we done everything we can to prepare the employees? Do they have the tools, the resources, the people that they need to go to be able to continually improve? What should we expect as an organization from day one to week 6 to month 6 to year 6, potentially, depends how big it is. What should that curve be, that adoption curve? They used to call it the learning curve. It's really more than that. Learning it's one thing to build your knowledge and feel safe and secure when you leave the classroom that, yes, I can do this. It's another thing to, after that training, applying it in the real world without having your instructor standing there saying, no, Amy, do this, click this button. No, Kevin, do that, etc. And so being able to be involved with that retrospect to be able to continually take the pulse of the employees, be it through surveys or help desk calls or a combination of everything, and continually say, where are people continuing to struggle? How can we help them improve that? Do we have a webinar? Do we have a video? Do we have extra help? Do we rethink how we do this? I think the challenge with big projects, particularly IT projects, is it's not necessarily practical at that point to say we have to go and rethink this IT process to make it better, because that's costly and that takes time, right? So you have to position that and then think about what does that mean from our productivity, from our employee standpoint, from the frustration level, etc. Don't know if that answers your question, but I think really what it is it's got to be the long game with change management and retrospectives and knowing what works. Because unfortunately, you don't always know what works right away. It's not until people start to use it that you can tell what's truly working and what isn't. And where have we as a change group, where have we had success, have we not?
Well, that's great, Amy. I think we could wrap it there, but I want to say thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For walking me and our massive audience of ones of people through this discussion. I've learned a lot, so thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Take care.